What if you could be a landlord, but not for an apartment building? What if you could own a piece of the earth itself? Well, today, we're going to dig into two companies that do exactly that. They own huge stretches of the very land that builds our homes and grows our food. So let's get into it. I mean, really think about that for a second. How does an ordinary person like you or me get to own a piece of a massive forest out in the Pacific Northwest, or a whole bunch of different farms that literally feed the country? Well, turns out it's not just possible. There's a special kind of company designed for exactly this. And the answer is something called a real estate investment trust, or a REIT. These are companies that let you invest in giant portfolios of property. And the way we're going to understand them today is by going straight to the source, their quarterly 10Q reports. This is where companies have to tell the SEC the real, unfiltered facts about their business. So today, we're putting two of these REITs head to head. First, we've got Rainier, an absolute titan in the timber world. And on the other side, Farmland Partners, a major player in owning crop-producing land. It's a really cool matchup, you know? It's the forests that build our houses versus the fields that fill our plates. So here's how we're going to break this down. At first glance, these two seem totally different, right? But as we unpack them, we're going to look at how they operate, how they're actually structured, and how their success is tied to two really different but equally essential parts of our economy. So let's start with the absolute basics. What are these companies actually doing every day? What do they own? And how does that stuff turn into cash? Okay, right out of the gate, you can see a huge difference in their business models. Rainier's game is pretty straightforward. They own forests, they sell the timber, and they develop some of that land for real estate. They are, at their core, a supplier for the housing and construction industries. Farmland Partners, though, plays a different game. It's way more diversified. Yeah, they lease land, but they also sell crops themselves, they offer loans, they're really woven into the whole agricultural economy. And when you look at what they physically own, it tells the exact same story. Check out the scale of Rainier. We're talking over 2 million acres of timberland. They are all about massive, concentrated forests. But Farmland Partners, they're playing chess, not checkers. They measure their success by diversity, spreading their bets all over the country. Different climates, different crops, different regional economies, from the Corn Belt all the way to the West Coast. So one owns trees, the other owns dirt. Very different assets, but, and this is where it gets really interesting, if you look under the hood, you'll find they're built using an almost identical blueprint. Both of these companies use a clever structure called an UPREIT. Here's how it works. You, the investor, buy shares in the main public company, say Rainier Inc., but that company doesn't actually own the land directly. Instead, it acts as the manager, the general partner, of a whole separate thing called an operating partnership. And it's that partnership that holds all the physical assets. It's just a super common, really tax-efficient way to manage these enormous real estate portfolios. And make no mistake, that public company keeps a tight grip on control. Rainier Inc., the company you see on the stock market, owns a whopping 98.7% of the partnership that holds all that valuable timberland. And Farmland Partners, they're using the exact same playbook. The public REIT owns 97.5% of its operating partnership. So the key takeaway here is, while their assets couldn't be more different, their corporate DNA is basically a shared industry-standard blueprint for running the business efficiently. All right, we've seen what they own and how they're built. Now for the main event. How are they actually doing? Let's dive into the numbers from their latest quarterly reports and see what's what. Okay, looking at their recent numbers, you see two totally different stories playing out. Rainier's is pretty straightforward. Sales and income were down, leading to a small net loss. Okay? But now look at Farmland Partners. They posted a huge operating loss, which looks bad, right? But that's mostly because of a one-time write-down on their assets. And yet, they actually ended up with a positive net income. How is that possible? Well, they had a big $24 million gain from selling some property. It's the perfect example of how you can't just look at one number. You got to see the story behind it. And this chart just puts their size into perspective. I mean, it's immediately obvious. Rainier is a much bigger company with over $3.3 billion in assets. Farmland Partners is smaller, but you can see that both are clearly using a good amount of debt to help fuel their growth. Okay, so what does the future hold? Look, every investment has risks, and by digging into what each company says they're worried about, we can see the real story and why owning both of these might be such an interesting idea. And this right here is where it all clicks into place. Their 10Q reports spell out their biggest fears, and they could not be more different. Ryanair's future is tied directly to the U.S. housing market and interest rates. It's all about construction, mortgages, and how many people are buying new homes. But farmland partners, they're thinking about the global food economy. Things like geopolitical conflicts in Ukraine, international trade deals, tariffs, extreme weather. Their risks are almost mirror images of each other. Think about it. One is all about shelter, and the other is all about sustenance. And that is the key takeaway. Owning a piece of both gives you exposure to two fundamental, but completely different pillars of the real economy. It's diversification you can literally stand on. Which kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. As our world gets more and more digital, more abstract, what is the real, lasting value of owning the very ground that provides our shelter and our food? Something to think about. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.